APLG and Tears. Those of us like our spirituality with the twist. Daniel
Yes.
was fucking with me before this thing started.
We get it.
There it is. The gear.
The gear.
Uh,
I'm the only one with this gear, by the way. Nobody, people are like, oh, where'd you get that from? I was like, I
to
made it.
other people. I got a badass cup.
Yeah.
I have it with me today. I think it's sitting in the other room it's sitting actually on my altar in the other room.
Nice.
My other Buddhist paraphernalia, soaking up good vibes. All right, so we decided like end of 2024 into 2025, this is the time for us to start talking about this thing called karma mudra, which is the use of relationships, sexuality, especially in the spiritual path, right? Which we're going through all kinds of different dimensions of this. And that is the subject matter of 2025, maybe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like once we open up the subject matter, it's open.
Yeah.
The Pandora's box is open. It is open. So this will be a subject matter to be ongoing per our infinity number of episodes that we're going to do with this thing.
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, this is like alchemizing desire number 3 of 3,000 or something like this.
yeah, that's right.
That's not totally true. We're gonna have on other people and whatnot. So we'll talk about it, but it'll be
Yeah,
through different lenses and that's kind of how
yeah,
the
yeah. We got other people going to talk to, but I think, yeah, in terms of our presentations of
yeah,
spiritual subjects, this is our time
for
to
sure.
do it.
For sure.
So, we were going to talk maybe the next few weeks about like the idea of attachment and what that means in terms of like spirituality, and then a little bit in terms of psychology. I think that I was thinking about, Daniel. That's one of the things I think we're trying to do that's a little unique, which is to bring some of the psychological stuff in here in a different way
Yeah.
than maybe other people would do. So, I mean, I think that's an innovation.
Yeah. And people like it.
Yeah, I
We
was
get good
legit
feedback.
thinking like there are like in it somewhat in I mean, it's hard to say you're innovating Buddhism. It's been around forever, and Taoism and these things, but in our own little way, I guess we're trying to do things that are innovative, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, so the subject matter of the day is this thing of what's called Sutrayana and Tantrayana. And this is a way of talking about, I guess you could say Buddhism, but maybe the spiritual path in like two different directions. In terms of attachment, the idea is that the Sutrayana approach, and this comes from the Buddhist sutras, the sort of the Buddhist spiritual texts, right? They're called sutras, and they call this Sutrayana. Yana means a vehicle. But
Yeah.
anyways, the sutra vehicle, but really for what we're talking about here, the idea of like kind of rejecting attachment and seeking kind of non-attachment, which of course is really big in the Buddhist world, and we want to talk a little bit about that,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, and we should just give those two terms because no one knows those terms for sure. So Sutrayana,
That's what I'm
as in
just doing, dude.
yeah. No,
You
I know.
defined it.
Yeah, right. But then the other side, the tantra side also. So
Yeah,
go ahead, go ahead. You do it. I just want to make sure we do it.
yeah. Well, the tantra on this side is where, from what we're talking about, is the use of like sexuality, desire, passion in the spiritual path. So you don't turn away from it and try to like pull away from it as a spiritual goal, but you sort of more embrace it, so to speak, and try to use that as like sort of your
Yeah.
spiritual, sort of just part of your spiritual tools, right? There's more to say about that, but you got other stuff you
Yeah.
want to add to that because there are things you can. Those are big terms, obviously, from what you're pointing out. There's lots you can say about them.
Yeah, for sure. I think one is the like the study vehicle or the study path. Sutrayana is the path of learn. I mean, it's all learning, but we're talking about specific learning from writing or learning from teachings, right? In that sense. And the Tantrayana is the practitioner side, the experiential side, the one that you get from learning, the one that you get from practicing. And those two are often done in tandem because you can't just intuit everything. You can't just practice. I mean, you want to learn from everything, but you have to learn from somewhere because inevitably you're going to run into problems that you have no answers to. So you need to refer back to something in order to get some frame of reference and then weave back into your life. So these two sides are two sides of the same coin. And what's the same coin? It's the development, the vehicle for your own enlightenment, essentially, right? The enlightenment vehicle.
I mean, I guess you'd have to say that there's lots of studying and learning in like tantra.
Of
You know,
course.
like it's kind of shocking how much there is. There's all kinds of stuff to learn there,
Sure.
right? And then Sutrayana people, a lot of times those are monks and people are doing practice. So it's part of the picture, but I get what you mean. It's like there's different ways you can kind of break this stuff up. And
Yeah.
actually, Dr. Nita tries to do like, we're using in part Dr. Nita's book on karma mudra, sort of like one of the starting points. So
Hmm.
we can kind of maybe do like his little checklist on a couple of sides of this. But what struck me about it, we were doing an episode last week, and I think you were really, when we were doing that, we sort of had these little bits of show notes kind of prep, but you were really taken by this idea of like what constitutes a spiritual life.
Yeah.
And this is kind of at the core of those questions too, right? What do you
Mhm.
do with these parts of yourself, right? If we think
Mhm.
about it in terms of one side that tends to be pulling away
Yeah.
from desire, attachment, passion, sexuality, right? And another side that is more like, no, we're going to work with that. Yeah, that makes a big difference in what your spiritual life is going to be for sure, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We had mentioned this last week about, is a spiritual life inherently ascetic or inherently monk-like or inherently renunciate? And the the tantric path would say absolutely not.
Yeah.
But they would that would no, that would not be the case at all. In fact, they would be the opposite. They would say, how do you weave that in? Now, I mean, there is the deep understanding. There's tantric yogis who, coalesce their sexual energy and they're free of attachments from, life and things like this. And they're kind of an ascetic, but they're doing it in a way to, enlighten them and make themselves enlightened. And we see this today with people who are, a little bit more, I guess we can call them flighty. They don't want to be attached to a certain area, but they're kind of free and easy, more vagabonds. I mean, maybe they're not. Maybe this. Actually, maybe not. There really aren't that many people like that. These are people who live in
Culture
vans.
doesn't support that. You know what I mean?
These are like van life people.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Who sell everything and then just like want to just travel and whatnot. They're not part of the norm. I mean, yeah, there's a niche of people who do that, but it's certainly not the norm, actually.
And culture doesn't really support that kind of free and easy wandering
No.
lifestyle.
But
But the
truthfully, they never really did. No culture ever really did. They were just in like Tibet and India, they were so prevalent at one point that it was seen as part of your own good, like religious fortune to help these people. And so maybe you can say that like that was part of the religious culture and therefore part of the actual culture. But I think now with the way that we have been divided, and you could certainly, reflect on this as well, we don't have a whole lot of religious influence on the culture because we are a panacea of cultures, and there is not one kind of dominant religion, to the chagrin of many, of course, I'm sure, you know. But when you don't have that, you have, you're free from hegemony. But if you do have that, then there are some practices that are passed along the population that then can be used, to foster their own things, positive and negative. I know that might be a little bit vague for our audience, so I apologize if I'm speaking on like super large anthropological facets at this moment, but that's how I see it.
I always sort of felt like I'd have to find my own little spiritual way, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of what the culture was doing.
Yes.
But like to me, what popped out, and I guess we'll see what you think. What popped out with this is like, well, how do you think about attachment? And I don't know. All right, so as the fates would have it, I was trying to think of like how to talk about this, and I'm listening to a little audiobook from one of the Buddhist scholars who I like. The guy's name is Roger Jackson. I always get like I can't remember who's the Jackson who made all the Lord of the Rings movie. Is that Peter
Peter.
Jackson?
Peter Jackson.
This is Roger Jackson. Sometimes I get those first names messed up with these two dudes. But anyways, he's a Buddhist scholar and he wrote a book called like Reincarnation. So I'm making my way through it. And he says, like, part of the oldest theories that you get with spirituality are what he calls the samsara karma moksha model, which goes something like we're stuck in samsara. We talked about this in different episodes, but samsara is kind of like the everyday world around you that you get stuck in, and also kind of like the cycles of reincarnation. So you can think of this maybe on multiple levels.
It's the
Sometimes
Matrix
it's just like the matrix, the shit that we're stuck in,
for sure.
Keanu. Other times, Lawrence, other times it can be thought of like, you just keep reincarnating into that same shit over and over again,
Hmm.
right? I think someone asked the Buddha something like, what's my next life going to be like? And he said, what's your life like now? Probably be that shit again. You want to do that again?
Mm.
If you're lucky. Sometimes it can get worse. But in any case, that, and then the karma part is we're kind of all stuck there because of our own karmic inclinations that we built up, right?
Mm.
And then the moksha part just is, kind of a great word, like meaning freedom. I think sometimes that's like the name of like, the yoga studio in your neighborhood or something. You might not even know what the word means. but it
Hmm.
means a kind of a spiritual freedom, right? Well,
So
that could have multiple levels too. But I guess part of the idea, like in this way of thinking, initial thoughts were like what keeps you bound could be your attachments keep you bound.
yeah.
So it's a question to think of like, what do we think this means? And then what does Tantra try to do, handling that stuff in a different way? Yeah, I'm
So we
sorry. Yeah.
don't, yeah. So from the yoga, you mentioned yoga, right? And so in yoga, I know not everybody's watching this on video, but an open palm, right? Fingers spread. This is the yoga mudra. So this is the sign for yoga, right? Or sign for mudra, or the sign for moksha. And I was reading this book that somebody bought me recently, and they were talking about that this mudra and why this and the different definitions of moksha. And most often, the definition is freedom. But actually, when you look at it from the side of this mudra, which is again for our visual audience, they can see my palm is open. For our audio audience, I have my hand up, and I'm just basically going to give somebody a high five with an open hand. That's the moksha mudra. Well, why is that? It's release. Because when you are holding something in your hand, let's say I'm holding this tin, I have all four fingers and my thumb wrapped around it. So it looks like a fist. But what's the opposite of a fist is an open palm with the fingers spread. And what are you doing with this time? You're releasing. So the action of opening is the release. So freedom thereby is when you're not holding anything, but the action to get to that freedom is release. And I don't know when else I'm going to get to share that, but I wanted to because it fits right here so perfect. And these are the kind of things that roll around in my head, you know.
Well, when you think about something like that, okay, so this is like the whole debate about like what does attachment mean, right?
Yes.
And it could mean like different things in different contexts or something, right? Because there isn't
Yeah.
a thing that would go, you want to release stuff, and in
Yeah.
releasing stuff, what are you letting go of? Your issues, your things that are holding you back,
Your identity.
knots in who you are, you know, false versions of who you are, false identities, like you're releasing. I mean, you could think of it in that way. And that's a
Yeah.
kind of like, yeah, you could say like letting go of attachment in that sense is, part of any spiritual path, right?
Yeah.
Tantrayana, Sutrayana, you want to do that on some level, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But that's almost, I think that has a Tantra vibe. Well, a lot of times what ends up happening in the Sutrayana means like you like, and we're going to talk about like desire with this, right? But you start to get away from what the desires are. You're purposely trying to pull yourself back and like non-attach, right?
Mm-hmm.
As sort of like a tool and a goal or something like that.
Yeah.
Not, and maybe in the way that even like what that image in the hand means to me, which is like going to let go of potentially all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But specifically a lot of times the way this gets like thought of, like the more sutrayana thing we were talking about earlier, has more to do with like letting go of attachments and emotions and those kinds of things. This is the Dr. Nita stuff where he's contrasting this too. So we'll talk our way through it. And then the Tantra one is more like, no, I'm going to embrace and transform my emotions. I'm going to work with my attachments. I'm going to work with my desires, like we were talking about. So that's sort of this point of contrast, right? And then it ends up a lot of times meaning like in the more maybe conventional non-tantric kind of paths, it will be like I'm going to purposely try to like get rid of the causes of my emotional difficulties. Sometimes we use this word dukkha, emotional sufferings, right? And in some ways this will be like even monasticism, where people like step away from the world overall, right?
Yeah.
And whoops, I think my son
I
is crawling along behind me,
thought
and
I
now he's
thought
gone.
I thought I saw a little mouse back there.
Yeah, little mouse in the house. So
But Eric, you know what, man?
yeah, so I mean, and it raises questions because I think a lot of times when people, we'll go through the rest of Dr. Deer stuff, Dr.
Yeah.
Nita stuff. I think a lot of people times when people think about spirituality, they think about it more in that Sutrayana way. I'm
Yeah.
going to let
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
attachments go. I'm going to like, and that's my progress or something. And my almost like your goals are sort of to be like non-affected,
Yes.
and I guess I'm trying to like in a certain sense give a contrast to that. Not saying it's bad, but there's a contrary position, which I think I'm trying to advocate for in our little podcast project,
Yeah.
which is like, no, you don't have to do things that way. You can use these experiences, emotions, passions, desires as tools of the spiritual path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so like I said early on, you're alchemizing your desires, right? You're not trying to avoid, you're not trying to evade, you're not trying to not do. we're saying the tantras are saying the path is through, not around. But more importantly, and not more importantly, but simultaneously, these attachments are super
Mhm.
deep, beyond even to the level of your deep penetrative awareness, actually. It's, I mean, I don't even know how to like fully get, I mean, the reason why I'm saying this, and we're not going to go into it now because I haven't really done it, and I don't, and this is not, I've been thinking about it for the last like 90 seconds, and if I should really go into it now. But what I'm going to just share for my own self is that like I have had some moments uh, on some psychedelics, never in this country, because just in case I run for Congress, they'll never be able to use this video against me. So fuck you. But I mean, I've had some very deep moments where it seemed like deep states of transcendence was possible, was imminent. Actually, that was the mode. That was the place where I was going to. And yet there was things that were holding me back, that I fears and like beyond emotions, and just I don't know, I could say like chains that were gripping. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
That
Mhm.
were, even though I was like being vacuumed up into somewhere, these things were holding me back. And I couldn't identify anything. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't shame, it wasn't fear, it was all of them and then more. And as we're talking about this, like these attachments in contrast to, the release of them, I'm just now being, I guess, shown those experiences that I had, in a sense, to say like there is far more that holds us in place than we are probably aware of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's a truth to that, obviously, right? When it comes up in like the meditative literature too, people get to like, there's these stories, the person is really close, but they have something that's kind of holding them back or something like that.
Yeah.
Now, I guess it depends on what you decide to do with that. We've told this tale before, but there's the one about like the teacher and the students, and this person just can't make progress and can't make progress as a student. And so the teacher eventually says, "Hey, we're going on a pilgrimage." And they travel and they travel and they travel. And eventually the student's like, "Where are we going?" And they climb up a mountainside, and eventually they're in kind of like a nice valley in the mountain, the lake, and there's a little house. And then the teacher goes, "Okay, listen, there's your house. You've been longing for this house inside of yourself for all this time. Now here's your house." And all of a sudden the student pops, right?
Mm.
And just gets over that. And so that's a one way of thinking about attachment then too, right? The person was craving this, and all of a sudden, okay, here's this thing you've been longing for, bang, and all of a sudden you can kind of like get over it. But I think if you asked at the time, would that person know they were longing for a house? Probably no, right? But it was like holding them back in some way.
Hmm.
But I guess, for me, and I don't know what you think about this, but it's sort of like I'm partially curious what you think about how people think about spirituality in terms of this. I was thinking about, it's Robert Wright. Yeah. He's the guy who wrote these kind of books about meditation and all
Yeah,
that kind of
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Why Buddhism is true is the one, his
Yeah.
probably
Yeah.
most famous one. Yeah,
So I
which
look
is
at
a
like,
good read for those who haven't read it. Why Buddhism is true, Robert Wright. It's a good read.
yeah, yeah. But I think like he's sort of more representing, in my mind at least, sort of that idea of like how it's attachment that causes your problems and then you have to
Yes.
let go of them or something. I think that's sort of
Yes.
that's the path that he's talking about. And I think that's what a lot of people sort of think, that this entails. And there's
Yes.
almost like this understanding like, well, if I can get rid of my feelings of attachment, then I won't be affected by the ups and downs of the world around me. I won't be affected as much by the pains of the world around me. I'll have this distance from them. And I almost feel like that's a little bit how I think about how he thinks about things. At least it seems that way to me. And I also think that's what people think in the culture. Like that's what a
Yeah.
spiritual path is, or that's what the Buddhist path is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And we
I,
touched on we touched
yeah.
on this a little bit last week too. So that, yeah, no, I believe I believe that to be the case, that inherently in a spiritual path is renunciation, is asceticism, is abstinence, you know?
Oh yeah, because you had that family member who was kind of going like, yeah, like you're still interested in sexuality. I thought you were a spiritual dude.
Yeah, what do you mean? Haven't you transcended that? What do you mean?
Yeah,
You haven't cut your balls off yet, dude? Bro, what are you waiting on? You know?
Spirituality now.
Yeah, get it, yeah, and then there, and therefore, then mindfulness is a way to kind of remove yourself. That's the kind of like the path towards, becoming now, which is none of the, none, in my opinion, none of the above, not attached, not anything else. You sort of, but like you said, the downside to that, and this is really the downside to this, is that you become kind of an automaton. You're sort of removed, you're removed from society, but you're still in it. And I think the way that I would describe it is that you're not removed from society, you're in it. You're just not attached to it. It doesn't affect you in the way, like, if we're going to use a term from biology, you have a hydrophobic barrier, meaning you keep water on the outside of you, in some kind of like energetic sense.
But I mean, like, I don't know what I think about that. I kind of as I was prepping these little notes from Dr. Nita, I kept thinking, yeah, that seems like that's an attitude that we have, you
Yeah.
know. And then it also I see is connected to sort of like the 10% happier movement, right? Where, it's if you're not familiar with that, it's one of the journalists, I can't remember his name, but
Dan something.
yeah, yeah. He had like a panic attack, I think, on camera or something.
Yeah.
He had been a war correspondent for years, probably was a
Hmm.
little PTSD'd out, right?
Hmm.
He started having these panic attacks. And then, he discovered meditation as a way of starting to help to deal with the anxiety of these panic
Yeah.
attacks. And he
Yeah.
talks about this kind of thing of like the 10% happier kind of vibe, which I think that's another thing that's real common in the culture. As I was thinking about this, if I can take a step back and have more non-attachment, then I can be 10% happier. But as I was thinking about that, I realized, at least for myself, and then like, to the extent that we're trying to communicate things of our ideas here to other people, I would say that like I'm not satisfied with the 10% happier thing. Like I
Yeah.
want more than 10%.
So
10% isn't good enough for me. And it got to me a little bit your question last week of what constitutes a spiritual life. And I was like, 10% happier for me, that's not a satisfactory spiritual life, personally. Yeah.
there's two points. One, so my mom is we've had her on the show before. So I think it's called Nadia's Journey, which is a great episodes. Eric did most of the interviews. I was kind of a fly on the wall, just learning about my
But you
mother.
kind of did that on purpose because you thought, hey, let's let these two people
Yeah,
talk. Tell
yeah,
about
for
your mom,
sure.
let
It
someone
was
else.
great.
Mhm.
But she mentioned something to me the other day when I was visiting with her. She said, she came here and like she was meditating in the 70s and it was not cool. People thought you were weird.
Yeah.
They were like, why would you do that? That's so weird. Like that's a strange thing to do. And so, even though I understand what you're saying about the 10% happier or the kind of mindfulness piece, is that it's a limited, what we're saying is these are vehicles that, you know, can take you the entire distance versus getting in a car, driving a block and go, oh, that was cool. And you're like, but you got a full tank of gas. No, I'm good. So we're missing out on that. But in the grander scheme, and this is probably why we are where we are in a meta sense for this podcast audience. Thank you for watching. Eric, thank you for rocking. Is that this is a mystical tradition. And unfortunately, and it really is an unfortunate thing, Eric, and I'm talking to you at this moment specifically from our conversation from earlier.
Okay.
Mystics have never been popular. The mystical movement have never been they have never moved the needle, and yet they find their way throughout history and they influence the culture from the outside in, never from the inside out. So if I can, put ourselves, I'll put our desires. I'm not going to say ourselves or our work. I will say our desires in the same vein as the Rumis and the Hafezes and everybody else who I can't think of, in terms of.
Company, but you try to like make your own little, you got those people are oceans. We'll try to pour a little bit of our own thimbles in there too, right?
Yeah, that like that's the vein, and they have never been popular, and these ideas are not popular. So even though meditation is 10% popular, now because it can give you a life hack and make you less anxiety and less anxious, so you can be more productive. Realistically, like I make this analogy all the time. It's like using the warm hood of your Lamborghini on a racetrack, not to drive, but to cook bologna.
Mhm.
Like it's not a misuse, but it's an inopportune use of the most amazing technology that we have, which is the human vehicle.
I mean, but it occurs to me with that, and we'll do the Dr. Nita stuff as we go
Yeah.
too. You
Yeah.
don't hear the possibility of something different.
You don't what?
If you don't hear the possibility of something
Oh
different,
yeah.
you don't know. Like if I didn't stumble across some stuff that said, hey, there's a different way of doing things, you know? So, I mean, I think that's part of what the goal of we're trying to do here too. And maybe specifically in this episode to say, yeah, there's the 10% happier thing. Not
Yeah.
trying to trash it. It's a thing,
Right.
right? Or maybe I associate more with like Robert Wright. Nothing wrong with it. It's cool, right? But I think it's like based on this idea of I'm going to develop my spiritualities, develop non-attachment, which is a little bit close to things like indifference or something, right?
Mhm.
Somewhere within that range. Therefore, I won't be emotionally involved in what's happening around me,
Mhm.
and therefore I'll be 10% happier or something, right?
Yeah.
But there's another way of thinking about this, which would be sort of more, I mean, what Dr. Nee is talking about, what we're talking about more like, well, let's come up with another way of using a spiritual path that like
Yeah.
works with the passions and directs them. So I'll go through the things and,
Yeah. Let's do it.
so, so part of it is the idea of, unless you want to kill this here, do you want to kill this and pick this up again? You're talking about killing some of the episodes and picking up.
Yeah, let's do that here for a second here. The only thing that I want to add to it, just at the end of this episode, because it's just kind of burning in my head. You mentioned something just now. You said that we want people to hear it, and again, in typical Buddhist and actually in Hindu tradition, so those who are interested in a little bit of like world religion, a lot of the sutras, right, the teachings, the written teachings, begin with "and once I heard," or "ever so did I hear," right? They always talk about when they heard something. And this came from the book that you recommended to me, Eric, which was an interesting read, right? The Other Goddess,
Goddess, yeah.
which is a good book. I recommend it. It's a wild, kind of a wild ride of history and femininity and tantra, but it's very good. Um, what the story comes from, where that thing comes from, where someone would hear something, is that they said that some of the gods would come down and speak to each other away from society, but close enough so that people around them could hear them.
Uh,
And those people would listen. And so that's why they start their stories with, and once I heard. And then would begin the rest of the teaching. So,
yeah, there's a whole thing of the tantra starting out like that a lot of times, like with that.
yeah,
Thus I heard, right? Thus
yeah,
I heard.
that's I heard. Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. So we're going to leave it there, but we'll pick it back up next time. As always, Eric, thanks for doing the damn thing. This is how we do it. Audience, thanks for listening. Check out the second half of this episode that should be dropping very soon. If you're on Instagram, hit us up, Gin and Tantra Podcast. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. We do appreciate all the love that everybody gives us and for sharing the work. And as always, bye bye. Peace.